to control people should I need to. And it's actually lovely that some of us were super on time or even early. Some of us were like, again, boom, right at 2. And then some of us were a few minutes late, because that's exactly the scope of the conversation, Messianic Jewish traditions. Today, I just thought it would be fun to take a look at the different, various, conflicting and fascinating sources as to messianic belief. Because it's not always a very mainstream belief, particularly today in this century, or at least in conservative and reform Jewish circles. I know, in fact, that the reform movement have bravely taken many strides to alter some of the traditional liturgy to de-emphasize a messianic belief. Because again, we also get to look at the psychology of it as well and say, is it even useful, to think of some kind of ushering in of the Mashiach, of some kind of world peace, or at least Jewish redemption, and also historically, how did it serve our ancestors in the past? This is a very, very big topic, and what we'll do really is just dive in, have a look at different sources, and see what the different questions are that our ancestors and modern Jewish thinkers came up with when it comes to this. Because again, there's obviously no single answer, and these are theories as well. And we get to just look at whether it's a supernatural understanding of a Mashiach, or more of a naturalistic place that we could realistically reach. So fun and games are to be had, and I'm going to screen share at this point. So yes, we're just going to have a look, as I said, at messianic speculations. Questions are highly encouraged, and I will be looking in many points for people to read, because we've got a lot of sources. We may not even get through all of them, and that's okay. So yeah, actually, let's just start with a classic Jewish prayer, right? Just to set the scene, because I think a lot of us are familiar with the Amidah, right? The Amidah, which traditionally, is prayed 3 times a day. If there's Musaf, maybe even 4, and it's Shabbat or a festival. And there's a very interesting thing that happens, like boom, right up to the plate, blessing number 2. Would someone like to read this out aloud? You're welcome to do the Hebrew or the English. And again, as this is like L'Shem Chinuch, for the sake of education, it's okay to say the word Adonai.
I'll do the English.
Thank you, Jill.
You, O Lord, are mighty forever. You revive the dead, everything. You have the power to save, and you are certain to revive the dead, everything. Blessed are you, O Lord, who revives the dead, everything.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Now, the reason we've got the brackets is because this is a variant. We've got the Atagibor Le'olam Adonai Mechaye Meitim. Our Rabbi Yarkin. Now, Mechaye Meitim is the thing that we're really going to focus on today, which is God, you're very, very mighty, and you revive the dead. Mechaye. You can hear the word chai, just like in Chai Neighbors. And then Meitim, dead. Like literally, met is dead. So we're saying God enlivens the dead. And the Reform movement very wonderfully said, do we literally believe that God resurrects the dead? Because traditionally, and while, as you know, every prayer is like a poem that can be interpreted, but the traditional meaning of the Amidah, when it was composed, the Talmud, like 7th century, it's throwing this around. They are shaping this prayer for Jews to actually say, blessed is God who resurrects the dead. Because it was a popular belief at that point that at some point justice would be done in the world to come and the dead would come back to life. And a lot of Jewish people, not merely the Reform movement, feels very uncomfortable saying that at this point. And so you will see many prayer books. And again, check out whatever prayer books you own, maybe after this session, or even just when you're next in shul or next virtually praying, just to see what your prayer book says. But in several circles, instead of saying, you, O Lord, are mighty forever, you are certain to revive the dead, instead what they just say is hakol, rather than meitim. So mechaye hakol, who revives everything, i.e. like who just breathes life into all things. It's a way to take out a kind of supernatural reference to God reviving the dead.
I sing it in community.
Yeah, please, Marty.
Privately.
Sorry, say that again a bit louder, Marty.
I was saying that when I'm in community, I sing the prayer as it is printed, but when I say it privately, I do not say Nechayam 18.
That's glorious, Marty. I didn't know that, and thank you, because it's lovely. It's very social and communal if we're all like on the same page saying the same lines, just to say let's chant the traditional. But yeah, when we're saying it to ourselves, particularly if this doesn't resonate for us, it does feel more comfortable to say Mechaye Hakol. So thank you for that. I'm glad that, again, you've already kind of engaged with just this puzzling thing that's thrown out, in the Amidah, one of our central prayers. So again, that's just like my starting point, because what I'd like us to do now is have a look at how did we get the idea that our God might be one who resurrects the dead, and then brings in a character to help God do so. So let's have a look, just a brief look, won't take too long. Sources for the Messianic age in the Torah. Anyone like to read this very long list of sources from the Torah?
I don't see a long list of sources.
There are zero, darlings. There are zero. This is a sarcastic slide. Okay.
Oh, crickets. Got it.
This is the sound of crickets, like croak, croak, chirp, 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 chirp. Moving on. There are no explicit, and actually I'm going to stop the screen share so we can see each other's faces here, so you know how serious I am. There are no explicit sources for God resurrecting the dead, for a messianic supernatural figure who is going to come back and redeem the Jews, any of that apocalyptic kind of literature, not in the Torah. At least not until we get much further down the line to our later prophets, our prophets who are operating and preaching at a time of disaster, i.e., when the first temple has already been destroyed. Now again, psychologically, that is fascinating and understandable, right? Because, if you're in a moment of, okay, we've left Egypt, we're going to settle the land of Israel, we're in the land, we're flourishing, we lost a few battles, we gained some territory, we won it again, we had some civil strife, but we got to the temple, we're sacrificing, we have sovereignty. You don't need to have a desperate fantasy of things being better. However, when you are kicked out of your promised land, having been told that God loves the Jewish people, you must have to think there's a plan. There's some kind of plan. And you hope and you pray for redemption, because the Messiah is really about redemption. So now you get to see in later literature very explicit messianic beliefs. So our biggest messianic prophet is Isaiah. So we're going to have a little look of Isaiah. We actually read a clip of him during Pesach, interestingly enough, for a Haftorah. So we're going to have a little ditty there. And I probably did spell sources incorrectly due to my terrible British inability to spell, or it's just my personal. I can't even blame my Britishness on that. So let's have a look. And again, what we'll pay attention to is what type of messianism is this? And again, is it possible? So let's go to Isaiah. He actually inspired a lot of artwork as well. And also, again, very understandably, the Christians really latched on to Isaiah and kind of tried to detect some Jesus-y notions as well. And I also, by the way, think one of the reasons why the Jesus story really emphasizes Jesus coming back to life is a way to say, aha, Jesus was the Messiah and was the person who was promised and redeemed people by creating a new way and a new religion and a new path. And again, Jesus is going to be about like 600 years after Isaiah. So if someone just wants to read this in English, and this is kind of, I guess, asking the question, who is the Mashiach going to be, and what's this Mashiach going to do?
I'll read it. A shoot shall spring forth from the stem of Jesse. and a twig shall sprout from his roots. And the Spirit of the Lord shall rest upon him, a spirit of wisdom and understanding, a spirit of counsel and heroism, a spirit of knowledge and fear of the Lord. And he shall be animated by the fear of the Lord. And neither with the sight of his eyes shall he judge, nor with the hearing of his ears shall he chastise. He shall judge the poor justly, and he shall chastise with equity the humble of the earth. And he shall smite the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall put the wicked to death. Jessica, you're muted.
You're right. I was just saying Yesha Koach Gary, so apologies that you didn't hear that. Would you or anyone be willing to succinctly kind of summarize that? Who is it that we're looking for? Or again, if you have any questions, such as who is Jesse? Because Jesse is going to give us a big hint.
Father of David.
Bingo, Joette. Yes. Jesse is King David's lineage. Jesse is the father of King David. So we're talking about, a shoot springs forth from the stem of Jesse. So there's two ways to interpret this. It could actually be King David himself, even though King David was already dead, 400 years before Isaiah is prophetizing, maybe even more. But it could be that David himself is resurrected, or it could be a descendant of the Davidic line, which also means Judah, I believe. He was from the tribe of Judah. But either way, so that is the person, the who we are identifying, David or a descendant of David. And then in terms of what this Messiah can do and what his character is, can anyone kind of summarize that for us?
He will be fair and judge people justly, and he will have the spirit and fear of the Lord, and take care of the wicked also.
Yep. Justice, definitely emphasized, like the ultimate judge. Someone who's perfect, someone who has fear of the Lord, who has this perfect, amazing spirit. And it's a little bit creepy as well. Joette wonderfully said, he shall take care of the wicked. But the literal translation here is, with the breath of his lips, he shall put the wicked to death. And again, we don't know if that's literally he kind of blows and can kill someone with a breath, or if it's more like he can testify, and with his words, other people will say, all right, that's dead, 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 dead. And again, we also get to ask ourselves, all the wicked on the earth, maybe just the wicked Jewish people, or the wicked heathens, the people that aren't Jewish, just how big is this guy's power? And there's more. Isaiah chapter 11 goes deep into this. So let's actually just keep building upon what Isaiah has to say, because we'll really get
Jessica, can I just ask, what would the quick interpretation be of, nor with the hearing of his ears shall he chastise? To me, you don't chastise someone with your, again, to me, that would be with his mouth. He would chastise. But what are they saying with the hearing of his ears?
It's about hearsay, I think. That was how I've always interpreted it. Meaning, if you just hear gossip and you're like, oh, I'll take that as fact, so I'm going to build up a case against you and call the cops and, be mean. It's no, this guy is going to truly know evidence and read the heart of people. So he's not going to let his silly senses.
Leslie.
Hang on, someone. Sorry, I just muted someone who was just having some background chatter there. But yeah, so Alan, that's a really good question. And thank you, because it's always a lovely thing to look at the text and say, ooh, that's a really interesting phrase and metaphor. What does it even mean?
So Jessica, I have a question then too. Smite the earth with the rod of his mouth. Does that refer to his words?
So again, I think it's a very poetic way of saying that, his tongue, his mouth is so powerful. It's rod-like, it's rigid, and it's harsh. You think about how Moses smacks the rock with his actual staff. And here, the Messiah's words and his ability to decipher the truth is so powerful that, like a rod, his words are going to whip people and strike them into shape. It's extremely powerful and evocative. This is terrifying stuff. It's not comforting. I don't like this messianic idea necessarily. But again, we have to believe this person is perfect. He has the spirit of the Lord, in the same way that at moments Solomon the Great had the spirit of the Lord, and other poetic figures throughout the Torah are credited with this, that he's got counsel with God. So it's almost like God's messenger, who is therefore flawless and a representative of God with crazy supernatural powers as well. So yeah, any other questions or reflections on this part of chapter 11? Because there's more. It gets weirder, folks. All right, let's go to this one. Again, a lot of text here. I hope you can see it. But one of the, so we have this day of reckoning coming, and then we have the understanding that not all the Jews are in the same place. So there's another big part of the messianic myth or idea, is that there is an ingathering of the exiles. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that phrase. We pray for that in other moments of the Amidah. And that's beautiful. That's just Jewish people get to come together. So here Isaiah is the first person to really talk about what that could look like. So let's just, again, it's some very odd stuff that's very rarely studied, especially on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. But if someone wants to volunteer to read this.
I'll read.
Thank you, Roberta.
It shall come to pass that on that day the Lord shall continue to apply his hand a second time to acquire the rest of his people that will remain from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from Cush. And he shall raise a banner, the seed of Jesse, to the nations, and he shall gather the lost of Israel and the scattered ones of Judah. He shall gather from the four corners of the earth. And envy of Ephraim shall cease, and the adversaries of Judah shall be cut off. Ephraim shall not envy Judah, nor shall Judah vex Ephraim. And they shall fly of one accord against the Philistines in the west. Together they shall plunder the children of the east. Upon Edom and Moab shall they stretch forth their hand. And the children of Ammon shall obey them. And the Lord shall dry up the tongue of the Egyptian sea, and he shall lift his hand over the river with the strength of his wind, and he shall beat it into 7 streams. And he shall lead the exiles with shoes, and there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people who remain from Assyria, as there was for Israel on the day they went up from the land of Egypt.
Beautifully read, Roberta. Thank you. Reflections on this. What do we learn? Do we have any questions? Is this all very comfortable stuff?
Well, Jessica, to me, one of the things, if we're talking about the messianic, I guess I'll say coming, that should apply to all people. Here, looks like, hey, if you're Israeli, if you're an Israelite, hey, you get all the benefits, and everyone else gets slapped, or whatever. But it doesn't talk about all of mankind coming together. It talks about, or this thing talks about, bringing all the Jews back together as one. So that kind of hit me a little bit, egotistical.
Alan, I adore you for spotting that, because it is front and center, and it is a very important thing we need to talk about, because in this vision, you absolutely nailed it. It's Judeo-centric. It's about the Israelites being redeemed. It's like a private redemption, and at the sake of the Philistines, the Edomites, the Moabites, all of our biblical enemies. They're all gonna get what's coming to them. It's a fantasy, and you have to, and it's coming from a very understandable place, because the generation of Isaiah have been throttled, beaten, killed, starved, dragged into exile. So they're one, they're yearning and they're praying and they're remembering all the times that they have been defeated. So again, it's this fantasy of redemption, and it's not big enough to be global, though. This isn't PC, or maybe it's just saying, okay, well, one day the land of Israel will be rebuilt. So on the other hand, you could even kind of make an argument that says, in some ways, this maybe came true, because if what Isaiah is yearning for, and the Jewish people, like he wasn't born, he wasn't speaking in a vacuum. But what's definitely going on here is, me and my people are scattered, and there's actual north and south tensions in the region as well. So, the Ephraimites and the Judites, they are warring. That is that, Ephraim represents the whole of the northern kingdom of Israel. And then Judah, the tribe of Judah, is southern Israel and Jerusalem. And they split, fractured. So there wasn't even peace within the Jewish community. And again, this is just a very personal plea, which is, I want my Jews to be healed, for them to come together, to no longer envy and have adversity within themselves, and for our enemies to be smitten, beaten away, and that then all the Jews will return. And that's, by the way, like both a wonderful thing that Isaiah does and a very troubling thing, because it's just, there's no way that this is world peace, But I also doubt that a lot of cultures at that time were looking as big as outside of themselves. He was solving a very immediate problem. And again, there's something awesome in the fact that Isaiah would probably be thrilled that 1948 happened, and that the Jewish people were able to start returning to Israel, and that Israel is still thriving and alive today. So that's actually an incredible turn of events. But you're right, it isn't for everyone. So thank you so much. That's basically the biggest thing to derive from the Isaiah vision. And by the way, just for fun, because there's a little point in this that you just think, okay, practically though, what is there shall be a highway for the remnant of his people who remain from Assyria and the people who are far away? This highway. So I just wanted to give us a couple of sources about that because it's incredible. So hold your horses. This is the resurrection of the dead explained, because Ezekiel also taps into this. Ezekiel says the top quote, and then Rav Eliezer explains what it's going to look like. So would someone else like to read this one?
I will. I will.
Go for it, please. Thank you.
Behold, I will open your graves and cause you to come up, and I will bring you into the land of Israel. Rev Eliezer said, the Holy One will make underground passages for the righteous, who will roll through them until they reach the land of Israel. And when they get to the land of Israel, God will restore the breath of life to them, and they will stand up.
So just a big wow right there. I mean, that is very supernatural and very impossible and incredulous. And it's pure miracle, because we're talking about raising the dead, the Jewish people who aren't already in Israel. It's the ingathering of the exiles, that God is going to make underground passages. And by the way, for the righteous, so you're screwed if you're not a righteous person. And they kind of roll, and this is what the picture is. It's a little bit blurry, but from the bottom of the picture, you can see there's these little tunnels with spirals in them, and they're going to kind of all connect to Israel. So people are kind of burrowing underground to the center, to Israel, and then they will be animated and they'll stand up. It's almost like a kind of symbol of the womb, of being rebirthed. Or some kind of animalistic feel to it. This is some wild stuff, because the rabbis, the sages, and again, Ezekiel, who is a prophet that's, I think, a little bit later than Isaiah, actually, but again, similar time period, they're coming up, they're arguing over what this will look like. It's a subway, exactly. It is the earliest subway system, thank you, is that Gary, of like underground tunnels. So the metro, this is the metro route to Israel. It's incredible. And I have to tell you one other interpretation, because also just wow. This is also in the Talmud. Short and sweet source. Barbara, can I have you continue to read this one? Because you did, that was, awesome job. Oops, you muted yourself, but you were on unmute originally. Perfect.
In the school of Eliah, it was taught, the righteous whom the Holy One will quicken will not return to the dust during the 1,000 years in which the Hold One will renew his world. He will provide them with wings like eagles, and they will fly above the water.
Beautiful, and apologies for the typo. You're right, it should have said Holy One rather than the Hold One. But yes, we have again another Talmudic school that another way that the dead are going to be resurrected. No. It's not underground. That's for the plebeians, that's for the workers. But no. The righteous are going to be given wings and will fly to Israel above the waters. So, and again, boats, I guess, were out of the question, too slow, but that they will be able to be animated and fly to Israel. This stuff is beautiful, poetic, physically impossible, breaking the laws of physics, but we're kind of building up an idea that this messianic age, there's going to be impossible miracles once again rendered for the Israelites. And again, going back to what Alan noticed, we're talking about the righteous. We're not talking about everyone. We're talking about the people who love and belong to Israel. Question from Roberta, please.
Wasn't a question, just a comment. When you went back, the last two are completely different than the original that you had in Isaiah. When you were talking about really more down to earth, that people are going to be walking on these highways with shoes on, or you have the 7 streams that they're going to get there. Now, the whole thing about shoes, what does that mean exactly? Because were the people barefoot? Did that mean that they were poor, or that they were going to be rich enough to have shoes, to have something to cover their feet? Whereas, so things would be different. And, where did the 7 streams come from? Are there really 7 pathways that would come to Israel, 7 streams? Or is it just symbolic?
Really good questions. I don't know all the answers. The shoes are it's the same thing as the wilderness. We're trying to have a conscious retelling of the Exodus story, because if you remember in the wilderness, the 40 years we were wandering, God takes care of our clothing and our shoes never wear out, meaning that when God is going to take care of us, he will clothe us and shoe us. So here we're saying, don't worry, the Israelites' feet are not going to bleed on the thorns and the rocks as they walk, a long way. But God is going to give you shoes, either by, you'll all become wealthy enough, or even miraculous shoes. And it's been said there are just 7 different, I think it's just physically true that Israel had several different rivers, paths, channels, and seas, the Euphrates, the Tigris, the Nile, like all of those things that did kind of connect up. But it could also be 7 is such a mystical number of wholeness. The 7 days of creation, the 7 days of the week, 7 ancient deities. I think I love that you went super deep into that. And from this sounds like this could be naturalistic. We've got the walking Jews, and again, peace within the tribes. Just a strong arm. God is taking the Israelites down. But we're going to go to another bit of Isaiah now, which goes very, very much into the supernatural, which turns the world order just completely upside down and is mind-blowing and quite famous as well. This is the utopian vision of Isaiah. So can I have a volunteer to read this?
Yeah.
I'll do it. And a wolf will dwell with a lamb, and a leopard will lie down with a young goat, and a calf and a lion cub, and a fatling shall lie down together, and a small child will lead there. And a cow and a bear shall graze together. Their young will lie down together. And a lion like the ox shall eat straw. And an infant shall play by the hole of a cobra, and over all the eyeball of an adder. A weaned child shall put his hand on the viper's den, but they shall neither harm nor destroy on my holy mount. I can't see the bottom there, Rabbi. My TV doesn't show the,
Still can't say.
but they shall neither harm nor destroy on my holy mount. The rest of it is hidden on
Yeah,
my.
okay, I'm sorry about that. It's just quite low down on the screen. It says, for the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the seabed. So that was good. That wasn't even part of the analogy. So thank you, Mike. You did a perfect Isaiah reading for us. And yeah, this is, a lot of us have even heard that the lion, will lie down with the lamb, a wolf will lie down with the lamb. All of these animals will suddenly be best friends. And there's two interpretations of this. There's the literal interpretation, which is the very natural laws of the universe will be suspended in order that harmony will endure and reign, and therefore expect the dead to come alive, because literally life and death are opposites. But there's also an allegorical reading, which is, this is actually really still part of Israel versus its enemy neighbors. And, really the wolf is Assyria, and the lion, is Egypt, and the bear, that is, the Moabites. And what we're saying is that the neighbors who are usually naturally very hostile to each other, they will finally, stop trying to attack and kill and live in harmony together. And again, we've seen animalistic metaphors. When Jacob gives his blessing to the 12 tribes, he calls them by half of these animals. He says, "Oh, Reuben, you're a snake. Oh, you, Judah, you're a lion." And so using animals as stand-ins, as representations of the nations, isn't far out. But literally, and again, it's a very poetic thing we're asked to imagine here. We've got these impossible situations whereby a little child isn't going to get bitten by a snake, and that also the diets are going to change. That the lion will be eating straw.
Yeah, everybody, including the animals, will be vegetarians.
Yeah. So that's impossible. And again, does that enrich and make sense for our metaphor if the lion, is actually Assyria? Are we just saying actually they will no longer be like at the top of the food chain? They're going to have to survive on more humble means, or are we just saying that the world is going to be so different we can't even imagine it? So there are so many other slides I want to get through. I'm just
Jessica, can I just say?
Comment, but please, but yeah.
Jessica, it looks like Isaiah learned his lesson, because here he's more inclusive of everybody in terms of, plus, especially the last sentence, for the earth will be full of the knowledge. So now he's inclusive of all, which I guess relates or resonates better with me in terms of, from a messianic type of message, it belongs to everybody, even the wolf.
Oh, Alan, I love you. You're right. I didn't even see that in this text. But yes, this is global. Everyone's going to have peace, even if it's going to suck for the lion, but it's inclusive. It's inclusive. It's bigger. God is more powerful and cares for more than just Israel. So I love that. I also saw Roberta. Did you want to have a comment? Or
I was just thinking of that, basically that we were going back to the Garden of Eden, and that's why I thought that the snake was really important, because here the snake will no longer be dangerous to us, that they're not going to bring our downfall. And so you don't have that's just what I saw about the child, not being harmed by the snake.
Hi, neighbors. You are
No
a bunch of the
sin.
smartest, most brilliant, analytical minds out there. Like, seriously, this is a gathering of incredible individuals who are getting to the heart of these texts. So I love that, Roberta, and absolutely. It's no accident, is it, that we really have a snake in several verses, like the eyeball of an adder, the hole of the cobra, he'll put his hand over the viper's den, snakes, 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 and I think just the harmony, the fact that it's full of nature, it's evocative of Gan Eden, and of a time where we were all vegetarian. There's a lot of literature that says that the animals didn't eat each other until the time of Noah, and then gods and humans were also herbivores. And then they were told, you can eat meat because you clearly have a desire for wickedness and sins. So satisfy your desire, don't eat the blood. Then later, don't mix milk and meat, la la la. We won't go into that right now. But yes, that this is an idyllic vision, which also brings the world in a circle. You know, it begins like this, then we have all the mess that humanity does, and it kind of ends like it began. Thank you so much. I think I believe the Lasker screen just went green. So, Jill.
So I was just wondering if this verse supersedes the previous ones, where it seemed as though the people who were not righteous would not be saved. They weren't going to roll through the tunnels. They were left behind. But this seems to be more inclusive.
Well, let's have a look at that, because we'll look at the verse numberings, because this is, verses 6 to 9. Verses 1 to 4 is this, let's identify that it's the stem of Jesse, and let's talk about judging and making sure that the righteous get their just deserts.
Right.
And then the ingathering of the exiles, that's later actually. So Isaiah verse 11 to 16 is then Alan's least favorite passage in Isaiah, rightfully so. But again, you've got the shoes happening. And this is when, God is gathering the Jews, from the four corners of the earth. So that's nice. There's the acknowledgement that, it's the lost of Israel, the scattered ones of Judah.
But then how does that fit with the other one, with this one? Because the one that we don't really like comes later.
Right. Well, I think it might just be that maybe we have to and I hate pulling this away from Alan, who found a solution. For the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to subscribe to that knowledge. But what we're talking about is everyone's going to know that they were wrong. That it's this powerful movement is going to be felt in the four corners of the earth. All the Jews will rise up. They'll all have their tunnels or their eagle's wings. They'll all get to Israel, and the righteous will be redeemed and awakened. It's going to be this incredible show. And again, knowledge is different than being redeemed. But the wicked, not necessarily are they going to be redeemed. So again, thank you so much, because this is...
Or how about this? How about when he wrote 6 to 9, our enemies at that point, there was peace. However, when he did 16 to 19, you know what? Our enemies showed their true colors again. And he said, to hell with you guys. I'm not including you in the Messianic era. And, nah. So go ahead and be nice to me from now on.
To quote Isaiah, nah, which is exactly what he says to his enemies several times over. And you're right, though. This is a lot of text. This is poetic visions. There's lines in between these. They might not all have been written at the same time. Or in the same vein. Isaiah could have written this one on a Tuesday when he'd had like a really good card game with an Egyptian and was like, dude, we're all gonna be redeemed. It's amazing. But then on like next week on a Thursday, he'd been chucked out of a Moabite strip club because he was Jewish. It's just, you don't even know. But I love that, we're looking at authorial intention. So, Alan, you're allowed to cling on to the fact that in Isaiah, there was a little bit of all-inclusiveness, of pluralism, of let's keep the world happy. But I think we're talking about choice, that, God is going to reveal God's self to the world. Be righteous, have a choice, stop hurting Jews. And again, it's this fantasy because he's definitely living in a time of oppression.
Jessica, in rabbinical school, was there some teaching or something about a particular midrash where one of the prophets gets thrown out of a strip club? I'm just curious.
Came into my mind. I don't know why that came into my mind as an example.
I don't know where you got that one from, but I got to tell you, that's a midrash.
I should write some like modern midrashim to explain the weird ramblings of Isaiah.
We're getting racy here.
I know. It's a good thing. Keeps us awake and on our toes.
What's interesting to me is to see the Jewish point of view, because basically the Christian point of view that I hear is basically we're all going to hell because we don't accept Jesus. So, and if we don't reform and believe, then that's our path. That's why we have to be saved. And in this particular case, it's like a different point, a different perspective. It's like who is not believing in the Lord in the way, because that's what it's saying on the 6 through 9, is that, you know, basically you have to believe in God and not, of course, it doesn't go on to the rest, but that is pretty much the Christian point of view, especially if you go in many of the states that are very Christian. That is, they'll tell you right to your face.
Oh, yeah. I had somebody say to me, "You're such a nice person. Too bad you're going to hell." Quote, literally, she said that to me.
Joette,
But,
I didn't mean it.
But I
Sorry.
said it was a she. Anyway, one thing that comes to my mind in all of this discussion is the second paragraph of the Aleinu. And in that, you know, it's like everybody is going to come to believe what we believe. And therefore, God will be over everyone. And as Marv liked to say, the whole world will be Jewish. You know, so it kind of, you know, came obviously much later since it's in the Siddur, but it's
Aleinu was one of the
we
earlier
always
prayers.
we always have it in our mind. I mean, it's always there. And, you know, at a time in the service when we are acknowledging the sovereignty of God, the kingship of God, we say that everybody is going to join us. They're all going to see that this is the way God is, and we'll all be Jewish.
Yeah, and this is the reason we say it quietly, because we're uncomfortable with the fact that we say this at the end of every service. You know, after all of our, you know, Oseh Shalom B'Mromav, like the whole world, please let's have peace. We also have this hope that everyone will figure out we're the best way, and everyone will be united, and there's smugness there. And again, the Aleinu was written, I think, in the 9th century. Sadia Gaon was when he was a congregant, basically wrote him a letter saying, "What should I pray?" And he wrote all the things, and it was originally for Rosh Hashanah. You know, the great Aleinu was in our high holidays, so it was a central, big, important prayer, and it's still in Talmudic times. It's only a couple of hundred years after the Talmud is codified, you know, with a full stop. So it's
Well, I have a note here in Marv Siddur, one of his notes, that says the Aleinu was ascribed to the school of Rav 3rd century. And yes, originally from the Malchuyot of Rosh Hashanah.
Yeah. Achna, you're right. It was originally found there, and then the Sadia Gaon pulls it out and says, let's have this every day, and let's have all Jews say it as a statement. But absolutely. So yeah, you're spot on by saying that piece of literature comes right, you know, when the Talmud is in full swing. And again, we've got a lot of other Talmudic wonderful messianic discussions to look for, but this is the heart of the matter, which is, you know, do we believe, you know, that, and do we want there to be one religion, you know, one God, one way of thinking, and you know, is this just a place, you know, is prayer and our fantasy literature a place to put our desires, our fantasies, you know, of either we were right, you were wrong, or at least just a kind of unification of humanity, like no one will argue anymore, we'll be a safe space at last, there'll be no more killing, no more massacring. So I love that you brought that to this point. And again, you look at Isaiah 11:6-9, it could be like a slightly hostile reading, because the lion and the wolf and the leopard and the ox and the bear, I don't think they get a choice. You know, this is written in shall, you know, imperative. You will lie down with your lambs, with your gentle things. A small child is going to get to lead you. You are going to be toothless, and you will not be allowed to be violent anymore. You know, it actually takes away a kind of part of the identity of these predators. And it's, you know, it's almost sinister. They shall neither harm nor destroy anyone on my holy mount, says God. You know, the temple is this magical, perfect space. You're not going to be able to do what you normally do. So, you know, you have to think, well, what does it feel like to be a viper who's not allowed to bite and sting and feed? You know, will these animals die? You know, is it actually quite a bitter and cynical vision, you know, that's oppressing these other species, you know, or is it just beautiful in saying, you know what, magically they'll be taken care of. It's okay. There'll be a miracle formed so that the lion can eat straw. So even in Isaiah, that just seems, again, I titled that slide Utopia, you know, this utopian vision where everyone dwells together in peace and harmony. But is that utopian? And again, do we want just a single form of everyone being homogenous, I think is the word? Or is it actually more fun to have diversity and differences? So, by the way, just looking at the time, it's already 2:52. I have over half a slideshow left because there's so much material. And what I'm thinking, therefore, is I've got my second session with High Neighbours in a month. It's the end of June. But what I was teaching then isn't as exciting as this. So maybe what we'll do is we'll do part 2, because we'll do a little bit more now, because there's an amazing source that I think it will be great for us to look at. But rather than try to squeeze so much more in, because, by the way, just as a teaser, the rabbis in the Talmud are going to say, what's the Messiah called? When is he going to come? What's he going to look like? What's he going to be riding? What are we meant to do? There's so much more that I think literally I've realized I can't believe I attempted to do the entire Messianic age in an hour. We'll look at another source or two, reflect on it, and then we'll do part 2, because this is like way too big. So just, you know, that's my plan, rather than go blah, blah, blah. So I'm going to have a look now at a slight counterpoint to the Isaiah vision and the Ezekiel one too, because Ezekiel was the guy who really talked about the tunnels, the subway system, as it were. But one thing that we can definitely deduce is that this is an overturning of the natural world, that this Mashiach has the ability to kill the wicked with his tongue, to sense the heart of people, to bring about animals doing supernatural things. There is another school of thought that purports that no, Mashiach is actually something altogether different. So let's have a look at that thought there. And this is actually going to be taken from Maimonides. And you know, this is Rambam. So Rambam's writing, I think 11th, 12th century. So he's later, but he's looking at earlier material. So who would like to read from Maimonides, Mishnah Torah? Nikki, actually, Nikki, I see your hand up.
All right, one should not presume that the Messianic king must work miracles and wonders, bring about new phenomena in the world, or resurrect the dead. This is not the case. Proof can be brought from the fact that Rabbi Akiva, one of the great sages of the Mishnah, was a supporter of King Bar Kokhba and described him as the Messianic king. He and all the sage of his generation considered him to be the Messianic king until he was killed because of his sins. Once he was killed, they realized that he was not the Messiah. The sages did not ask for any signs or wonders. You know, this makes me think of something really significant about Jews, that Jews, you know, are blessed with this intellect. We were blessed with a brain that, like all humans were, but our religion involves the practice of critical thinking. We don't just read from the Torah. We have a half Torah, and then we make a drash. And I think that this has been extremely critical, you know, and I'm saying this also from a psychological standpoint, that, you know, that this has enabled us to think about what happens to us. We don't just blindly pray. And think of ways to save ourselves. So we're not saved. We engage in saving.
Ah, Nikki, that's fabulous, and thank you. And you're right. This definitely comes from a place of the Jewish community admitting that they were wrong, you know, and having a misguided belief in Bar Kokhba. But what's interesting is that Maimonides identifies that Rabbi Akiva declared Bar Kokhba as Messiah, and that we never asked that Bar Kokhba to do raising of the dead, and there were no signs or wonders. He wasn't a miracle worker. He was a general. He was someone who they said he is going to redeem the Jews with power of the military, with just physical strength, with sword and shield, and that was good enough for them. And again, that's happening at a time when messianic texts are being written. This was the second temple was defeated, and Bar Kokhba was the hope that we would get back to Israel. So again, it's the second wave of despair for the Jewish people. And later prophets, Rabbi Akiva, one of the biggest, most intellectual minds of his generation, who was again allowed to admit his mistake afterwards. And they said, "No, you're right. Sorry, he wasn't Messiah after all." And they learned and they analyzed the situation. But I love that this at least suggests that the rabbis of that generation were willing to say Mashiach would come in the form of a military general. And again, what that would look like was just very literal. Like the Jewish people would get the temple back, would get Israel back, and would have, sovereignty in the land.
Good. I'll let Jill go first.
Oh, thank you, Alan. But it doesn't seem as though there's a universal definition of the Messiah, in that in some places he's described as it is described as raising the dead. But here it's winning battles and there's no mention of raising the dead. So it just seems as though the definition changes from time to time or rabbi to rabbi. And it seems as though the rabbis maybe have the power of deciding what the definition is of a Messiah at any given time.
Ooh, I think you just nailed it, Jill, because yes, the Messiah becomes whatever that generation needs it to be. And in that moment, military might, when we were teetering on a win, it's like, is it possible? Can we retake the temple? You didn't want, the people to be satisfied with some kind of like angelic figure coming out of the sky and just magically waving a wand and redeeming people. You actually needed to encourage real Israelites to support the cause with their bodies, so that generation needed a militaristic Messiah, a G.I. Joe Messiah, whereby when they were in the pits of despair, when they were living in Babylon and captured in like Isaiah and Ezekiel's time, there was no way they could do that. They didn't have a strong leader who could just reclaim Israel. So they had to hope for a supernatural victor. And again, you're absolutely right. Over the generations and the centuries, and even within the Jewish communities, that Messiah, that hope is very different. And again, we're going to look at that next time, because one of the issues is going to be, well, who is the Messiah? And that changes. Because again, if you are a northern Israelite, if you're an Ephraimite, then you might choose it's Eliyahu Hanavi, because Eliyahu was the prophet of the north of Israel for a while. And it's not the Davidic line at all. But again, when we look at Isaiah was prophesying in the south. So he was loyal to the Davidic line in the temple. He was a priest operating for that dynasty. So of course, he is going to say, oh, it's the son of Jesse. It's David or a Davidic line. So there's massive amounts of argument. By the way, there's going to be other later Talmud voices and sages who are going to say it's none of them. It's one of us. It's any one of us. Because again, when you're so far removed from those magical biblical heroes, then it doesn't make sense and also you've lost the lineage. You don't know anymore who's a child of David, who's a person from Eliyahu. You want to be able to inspire the people and say, maybe it's Alan Altschul. Maybe he's the Messiah. Listen to him.
More like the devil rather than the Messiah.
but really, maybe it's Linda Spivak. She's incredibly wise and sweet. She's our Messiah. So, and then again, that's a very clever stance to take, to inspire people in different ways to say it could be any one of you. So that is going to change over the century. So Jill, absolutely fabulous point, which is just the notice that this is all over the place. That, just like how in Judaism, even our idea of how God operates changes.
Jessica?
because again, things happen. The notion of what Messiah is and what the world could look like. Is it supernatural? Do the dead come back or not? There's going to be a lot of people that are going to, no, the dead don't come back. That's the ultimate fantasy. Also, again, is it just the Jewish redemption or is it global? Again, depends where you're at. Depends what's fashionable at the time. So back to Alan, and then I think there was
I'm going to throw a little wrench in this whole thing. Why are we even talking, or why are they even saying that it's going to be an individual? Why is it not just God's the Messiah? I mean, why is God delegating this to some other entity or whatever it is? God is a jealous God. Why does he want someone now becoming the savior, the hero, and why an individual? And the other thing is, in Jewish tradition, like in the Torah, certainly we have all our matriarchs, patriarchs, and everything. We got Moses, but at the same time, like, we don't want Moses to be considered like an idol where we worship Moses. But yet now, if this Messiah comes, well, I think we're putting this Messiah in a position of, hey, I think this is someone to really revere and pretty close to God. So I'm not sure why it's gone to an individual all of a sudden, because that to me goes counter to everything.
Yeah, no, you're.
Yeah,
So
can I riff on what Alan said? Because I get the sense that in our current day and age, that we're more looking for a messianic era as opposed to a person who is a Messiah. And a messianic era, to me, would be an era where there is peace throughout the world, and that would include everybody. And if you think that, if you think to the Pesach Seder, you have Elijah coming, and he's supposed to be the forerunner to the Messiah and to announce the Messiah, but maybe he's going to announce a messianic era. And so there's a custom of everybody taking from their own wine glass, their own Kiddush cup, to pour into Elijah's cup to symbolize that we all work together to bring about a messianic era. And, as I said, to me, that's an era of peace. Whether or not it's resurrection of the dead, I don't know, maybe not. But it just seems that in current thinking, I feel like it's more of an era as opposed to a person.
Yeah. I love that response, Stuart. And again, I have so many thoughts for Alan, and it's a brilliant point. And I love Alan's brain, because he just takes the concept and goes like, why is that even a concept? Like we keep talking about there's a Messiah. Is that even like, it doesn't feel Jewish at this stage? Because it's a very Christian understanding that there's like a person, an embodied representation of God on earth. And again, we've been very much educated just not to resonate with that idea. The problem is, though, that 1,000 years before Jesus, you had the prophets, and there would only be one or two in every generation who would claim, and again, I'm not going to dispute or approve of their claim, but they were saying, I'm the voice of God. Isaiah is saying, God is prophesying and giving you messages through me, meaning that every prophet was like a mini Messiah, delivering messages saying, please repent, God's angry. And we read them. And again, as Nikki said, like we have these haftarahs, they're teaching moments that the community would be told, think about your ways. God would rather that you gave to the poor than that you gave up a sacrifice and prayed properly. All of these messages. And the leaders of the Jewish people would claim, and maybe it was just to secure and maintain power. But again, these tends to be quite moralistic prophets. Like these prophets weren't doing harm. I think they were trying to inspire the people, to rally and to support. And they were often saying, give tzedakah, be full of justice. The virtues expounded in all of our major prophets are really worthy. So these were good-hearted human beings who were just telling us, God told me this in a dream. I had a vision, and therefore it became very much about the cult of the personality. And these were kind of holier than thou figures. And in the modern times, we've absolutely kind of done away with that. We beware the individual that claims that they're connected to God and has a vision and tells us what to do. That's very dangerous. And I know that a lot of us are very suspicious of certain very ultra-Orthodox religious leanings, whereby they pick up a person, the Rebbe, and refuse to believe that that character died, pray to them. There's pictures on the walls of, many Jewish people's homes whereby a male is being idolized and worshipped and is told that that was the Messiah in the generation, or at least, that was this kind of mythical, larger than life individual, who is inspiring us and changing the world. Because again, it's just also a human need to have leadership and to be told what to do. So again, I just love Alan's point that, and I'll see if I can find, I think in some sources, again, it doesn't even say there's one person. Sometimes you need a person to organize it. But really, as Joette says, and I'll end on this thought because it's a bit past 3, it's not even that important as to who it is, but to what it then does to us. And does it bring about happiness and peace and an end to war? And in very anti-militaristic ages, if you think about the protest songs in the 60s, I dreamed that there was no war no more, and that we all kind of put down our guns and uniforms and, had this perfect peace. So I think that that's definitely what a Messianic age would look like now. So yeah, just huge concepts here that change over time, that change to suit the desires, the needs, and preferences of the Jewish community. And yeah, next time we meet together, we will have a look at some other incredible, mind-blowing, and sometimes just bonkers sources where the rabbis, they don't know what they're talking about. They just don't. It's all speculation. It's amazing stuff. So thank you so much for learning this together with me. I loved every second of every comment that everyone made. It just pushed me further.
Thank you. It was
Thank you.
really
Thank you,
wonderful.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Bye.